ducks bob in the water. Our world right now is not so calm. In Lancaster County, the roads are muddy and a bridge just to the west of the lake is closed. Very minor in Nebraska, which left the state reeling. While no climate scientist can say this specific flood was caused only by climate change, they can say that global warming makes our weather more unstable and more extreme. Extreme sounds just about right for this particular combination of heavy snowfall, rapid melting, frozen ground, and a bomb cyclone. Nebraska and the world are seeing the impact of a climate change right now. We will continue to see more hot days, bigger rain events, flooding, and drought. Weather is more unpredictable, harder to plan for. Farmers know the weather is changing. They plant their crops up to 2 weeks earlier, plant different crops, or cultivators cope with the new pests, etc. Many people are hesitant to use the words climate change because it's becoming so negatively loaded politically. We rely on science every day. Food safety, medicine, new crop varieties, better ways to feed animals. These are just some of the ways we use that knowledge. Climate change is not a belief. It is a scientific conclusion based on a huge amount of data. The idea of climate change didn't leap into being with Al Gore. The effect of atmospheric gases trapping heat was first described by Joseph Fourier, a mathematician and physicist, in 1824. Scientists at our land-grant college know the facts about climate change. Two of Nebraska's own climate scientists helped write the High Plains region section of the National Report on Climate Change released in November of 2018. Let's use that expertise to protect our state. Right now, people in communities and on farms in 77 counties continue the backbreaking work of cleanup. They need disaster assistance, roads, bridges, and infrastructure. However, government must be planning for the future proactively as well. States must develop a statewide climate change plans, and more than 30 are doing so. Going through a disaster without a plan to mitigate the next one only perpetuates an ever more expensive need for disaster relief. LB 283, now before the legislature, would have the University of Nebraska assess the current impact of climate change on Nebraska and develop a strategy for adapting to it in the future. LB 283 remains tied up in the executive committee because the committee is unwilling to fund up to $250,000 for it. This at a time when Governor Pete Ricketts estimates $1 billion in agricultural losses after the flooding. This doesn't include other losses to homes and communities. Nationally, Congress must work together to drastically cut our fossil fuel use. There is currently a bipartisan bill introduced into the United States House of Representatives that would enact a market-based approach that will put a fee on carbon pollution at the mine, well, or border. All money raised by the tax would be returned to the households in monthly dividends. In bipartisan agreement, 44 leading economists signed an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal stating that a carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. We are at a point in history where clean energy sources are becoming more effective and can take the place of fossil fuels. Letting the market pick winners and losers without subsidies in the energy sector will encourage innovation of clean energy technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Congress must start thinking outside the box and build a bridge across the aisle on climate change. Doing nothing will cost much more than taking action. Bob?
The following is an editorial article from the editorial board of the Omaha World Herald entitled Mental Health Crisis Center, a Laudable Step by Sarpy. Omaha area police and hospital emergency room personnel face a heavy burden in trying to help individuals with mental health or substance abuse problems. Because our area is short of inpatient beds for such residents, many individuals in crisis due to mental illness or drug or alcohol dependency regularly wind up in county jails or emergency rooms. The Sarpy County government is commendably taking far-sighted action to address the needs through its plans to build a mental health crisis center. The $13 million center with 22,000 to 25,000 square feet of space would be the first such facility in the state. It's a much needed pioneering step. An average 28% of the Sarpy County jail's inmates at any given time have a diagnosed serious mental illness. The World Herald's Reese Ristow reports. A study found similar numbers for the Douglas County Jail. 34% of inmates had an acute level mental illness, 27% screened positive for post-traumatic stress disorder, and 29% had a substance abuse disorder. As Sarpy County Board Chairman Don Kelly put it, the de facto mental health centers are now your jails, correctional centers, and your emergency rooms in Nebraska, and that's just not acceptable. These people that are having psychiatric crises, they need help. The planned Sarpy facility would be available to all Sarpy County law enforcement agencies, as well as those in Cass, Dodge, Douglas, and Washington counties. Many of the specifics, including the number of beds and how the center will be funded, have yet to be decided. Dr. Scott Madden, medical director of the emergency room at Nebraska Medicine Bellevue, routinely sees the difficulties that present conditions mean for his hospital. An emergency room is kind of the dumping ground for those patients because unfortunately they have nowhere to go, Madden said, given the heavy demand for inpatient beds at facilities such as CHI Health Emmanuel or Lasting Hope Recovery Center. There are so many mental health issues in Sarpy and Douglas that these places are always full. About 40 patients with mental health or substance abuse challenges arrive each month at his hospital's emergency rooms. Those who require treatment at an inpatient facility stay at the hospital an average of 15 hours while they wait for an inpatient spot to open up elsewhere. An encouraging development in Nebraska is the use of telehealth services by which a psychiatrist or a psychologist can connect with patients and recommend treatment options. Positive, too, is Nebraska's participation in a 23-state project funded by federal grants to create a centralized registry so medical and law enforcement staff can see the current status of local inpatient psychiatric beds. The registry would be far more efficient than current conditions in which hospital staff have to call individual facilities to check for available beds. Nebraska's registry will be piloted in Region 6, made up of Douglas, Sarpy, Cass, Washington, and Dodge counties. These constructive steps are to be applauded. They will help patients receive care and relieve part of the burden on local law enforcement and medical staff. Paul?
This letter to the editor. When I circulated petitions last year for Initiative 427, the proposition to expand the federal Medicaid program to more than 90,000 hardworking Nebraskans, I believe their wait for access to needed health care would be over once that measure was approved. When I helped carry those boxes of signed petitions into the Secretary of State's office, I saw there was widespread support among Nebraskans to help those in need. When Nebraskans voted overwhelmingly to approve Initiative 427, I was confident, even though I knew the governor opposed its approval, that he would know the people had spoken. Well, apparently not. His administration appears to be slow-walking implementation of Medicaid expansion to the detriment of those who have for too long been deprived of adequate health care in the state. The governor's latest ploy to unreasonable postpone implementation and add burdensome, probably illegal requirements for potential recipients of needed access to healthcare is unconscionable. What a shame. Let's get a move on, Department of Health and Human Services. Let's get the wheels of implementation turning. I know you can do it. The people have spoken. Listen to the people. That was written by Randy Moody of Lincoln. Bob.
In Letters to the Public Pulse, Carol Larson of Omaha writes, I just learned about the proposed construction of a huge apartment complex in a residential neighborhood on Douglas Street in South Dundee. Located just west of the Child Saving Institute and extending from Douglas to Dodge Streets. This complex would mean decimation, not gentrification, of this perfectly good historical residential neighborhood. It would take out half the block on the north side of Douglas. There are plenty of other places where such a behemoth could be built. What is particularly disturbing is the lack of respect for the neighboring buildings, especially the house to the west. The plan is for the parking garage ramp to run only 9 feet from the entire length of the eastern wall of this house. Who could live in a house where cars were driving in and out just outside your window at all times of the day and night? If for some reason the apartment complex absolutely must be built, at a minimum, there should be a vacant lot, not just 9 feet between the complex and the neighboring house with trees planted as a buffer. Omaha, we can do better than destroy a fine historical residential neighborhood for no reason. Helen Jordan of Omaha writes, some of us old timers remember when the Papio used to flood every spring. My hometown of Ralston would be an island. Still, there are areas around the Papio Valley watershed that have houses that look great, but are not homes anymore. South of Center Street and west of 84th Street, there was a pocket of houses that are now offices of attorneys, dentists, podiatrists, and more. But nobody can spend the night in any of those buildings. It is still a floodplain. I certainly hope that there will be additional floodplain designations for places at high risk. Nobody should ever live there again. It's not going to get any better. James Burke of Plattsmouth, Nebraska writes, maybe President Donald Trump needs to spend some time in his office studying up on what's wrong in the nation instead of campaigning for his reelection and using thousands of gallons of jet fuel on his weekly golf outings. Ask the farmers and laid off auto workers, miners, and others affected by his uninformed edicts how great their America is doing. It seems that everything that Trump and the Republicans have enacted is rife with unseen and unintended consequences. He and his minions are severely damaging this country and are standing in the eyes of the world. His bizarre behavior should give us all cause for concern. He does not act as someone fit to be in any position of responsibility. And finally, Kathy Hunter of Clarinda, Iowa writes, we want to recognize Red Cross and thank them for the wonderful hot lunch they offered us. Saturday, we were in the Paradise Lakes area helping our daughter and her husband retrieve a few items from their flood-destroyed home when we heard a voice asking, do you want a hot lunch? That was so welcome that cold and windy day. Thank you, Red Cross, for all you do for those hurting. Paul?
It's 11:19. We're going to switch over to today's living and entertainment. We'll start out with the article from Barbara Quinn on nutrition. I received an outpouring of concern from many who knew I was in the midst of the bomb cyclone blizzard in Nebraska that has now turned into flooding in much of the state. The experience of watching ranchers brave the elements to protect pregnant cows and those with newborn babies from screaming winds of snow has been both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. In preparation for the predicted superstorm, my ranching family and friends spread out huge swaths of extra hay for their cows, which also served as a bed of comfort and warmth for their babies. Tragically, many of our neighbors to the east were not as fortunate, as they have watched their livestock perish in devastating floods. It takes a lot of energy to brave natural disasters for humans and animals alike. And during such trying times, food can provide comfort as well as nourishment. A well-stocked emergency kit can supply both and perhaps save lives. Besides a flashlight, batteries, first aid kit, and a battery-powered radio, Here are the supplies experts at www.ready.gov recommend we have ready for extreme emergencies. First, clean water. At least 3 gallons per person or 1 gallon per person per day for 3 days. Second, food. At least a 3-day supply of non-perishable food, such as ready-to-eat canned meats, fruits, and vegetables. Don't forget a can opener. Also, protein and fruit bars, dry cereal or granola, peanut butter, dried fruit, and nut mixes, canned juice in individual boxes of soy beverage or non-perishable pasteurized milk that does not require refrigeration. Next, sanitation supplies, bleach wipes, toilettes, garbage bags with ties. Comfort, stress foods. Yes, just like a warm bed of hay, we do need foods that provide comfort as well as nutrition during times of severe calamity. For me, that would be M&Ms or peanut butter cookies. Also, emergency preparedness experts recommend keeping all food in covered, waterproof containers. If cooking is not possible, commercially canned foods may be eaten out of a can without heating. And do not eat any food that has come in contact with contaminated floodwater. If the power goes out, keep refrigerator and freezer doors closed as much as possible. Refrigerated food will stay cold for about 4 hours if it is unopened. Thawed food usually can be eaten if it is still refrigerated cold. It can be refrozen if it still contains ice crystals. Discard any perishable food such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs, or leftovers if the temperature in your refrigerator reaches higher than 40 degrees for more than 2 hours. And remember, when in doubt, throw it out. If you know a power outage is likely, stock up on dry ice. A 25-pound bag will keep food frozen in a 10-foot freezer for 3 to 4 days. Just remember to handle dry ice with heavy gloves and don't let it come in direct contact with the food. Stay safe and please continue to pray for our farmers and ranchers in the heartland. Bob?
This is Amy Dickinson's Ask Amy column. Dear Amy, I am married with 3 very young children. My good friend is single. One of the things I truly enjoy about my friend is that she is in a different place in life. Her schedule is flexible, and she is always willing to spend time with me on my tighter, more inflexible schedule. She doesn't talk about kids or husband or compare her mom life to mine. It is so nice for me to go out together and turn off my mom brain and feel like a person independent of my family. Lately, she has been asking to come over to my house to cook for my family. The first time she asked, she said she was going through a difficult time, and so I told her to come on over. We had a nice time, but I felt anxious and distressed the entire meal. Later, talking to my husband, I realized it has so much to do with wanting to compartmentalize my worlds. I enjoy my friend, but I don't want to have to clean my house for her. I don't want her to see my kids throwing fits at dinner time. I don't want a potty accident to take over the evening. I want to have one person outside my family life that is just for me to enjoy. I mentioned to my friend how I don't like to host, but she reinforces that I don't need to clean for her, and she understands that kids can be disruptive. I don't think she understands my anxiety around the whole idea. Home is filled with love and laughter, but it is also where we fall apart and make chaos and create mess. How can I tell her this and still keep the valued friendship? Or should I just get over my anxiety about it for the good of our friendship? Signed, Upset. Dear Upset, my sisters and I have a shorthand way of communicating based on an old advertisement. Calgon, take me away. When we say this to each other, we mean if I don't get away from my kids, I'm going to lose my mind. It's okay to see your own needs, to see to your own needs, and you need occasional restorative time away from your family. Every parent does. So tell your friend, I love my family. I love spending time with you. But what I really want and need is to get away from my kids, to be me, only me, now and then. Can you help me with that? Your pal sounds awesome. She has needs too. She may be longing for a good dose of what you have. I hope you will occasionally loop her into your family's poopy, messy, chaotic life. But first, you do you. Dear Amy, recently my neighbor boy, age 7, ran out of his house yelling that his dad was looking at naked ladies on his computer, and it was sick. Not sure what, if anything, I should have done. Should I mind my own business, say something to the dad, or do something else altogether? Signed, a Denver fan. Dear Denver fan, anytime a child is in distress for any reason, you should first concentrate on the child, comfort the child, and make sure he is okay. Then yes, if possible, you should speak to the parent and make sure he realizes that his son ran out of the house and seemed distressed. It is best to remain neutral during this conversation with the parent and simply report that the child was upset and that you did your best to comfort him. Dear Amy, thank you for your response to the Symphony subscriber. As a classical musician by profession, nothing makes me angrier than seeing someone record a performance. Depending on the venue, ushers are not always helpful. I have, on many occasions, tracked someone down at intermission and told them to delete their video or stop recording. It is disruptive to other audience members, but more than that, it is disrespectful to the musicians. A live concert should be enjoyed at the present moment. We work very hard to create a concert experience, which is what you pay for when you buy a ticket. This is how we make our livelihood, and recordings are a separate part of that, not something we give away for free. Thank you for your sound advice, signed musician. Dear musician, thank you so sincerely for the music you bring into the world.
Amen. This article is entitled The Kitchen, Dutch Ovens Don't. How to avoid these 5 common mistakes. Dutch ovens are tools that can last a lifetime. Good things too, because some of them can get pretty pricey. The only caveat, you have to care for them properly. You don't have to season or love them quite as much as a cast iron skillet. That enamel coating really helps make your job easier. But there are some things you should never do. Here are 5 mistakes to avoid with your prized Dutch oven. Number 1, don't use it on very high heat. I confess to making this mistake for years before I realized the truth. Because Dutch ovens do such a great job of retaining heat, using them on medium-high or high heat is actually too hot. The pot can scorch if it's this hot, and food can burn and actually stick to the surface. Cooking at medium heat is more than sufficient for the pot. Follow this tip. Always cook on medium or low heat, even when frying or searing. Use high heat only when boiling a full pot of water or reducing a stock or sauce. 2, don't preheat it empty or on high heat. Preheating a Dutch oven on high heat is as bad as cooking with it on high heat. It can heat up too fast and the surface and food can burn. Also, you never want to preheat it while empty. This can cause the enamel to crack. So drizzle your olive oil in first and then switch the stovetop on. Follow this tip. Pour oil or drop that pat of butter into the pot before you start heating it, and make sure that heat is no higher than medium. Also, never place an empty pot in a hot oven. If you're baking no-knead bread, we found that it's okay to put an empty pot in a cold oven and preheat both together slowly. But no, there still could be a risk of the enamel cracking. If you're concerned, the safest bet is to use a non-enameled Dutch oven when baking bread. 3, don't fail to use enough oil or butter to coat the bottom of the pan. While the enameled coating on a Dutch oven may look glossy and non-stick, it's actually not. Like all other non-stick pots and pans, it needs a sufficient amount of hot fat on its surface to ensure food won't stick to it. You'll want to drizzle enough oil or melt enough butter to completely coat the surface before sauteing your onions. Follow this tip. Don't skimp on the amount of oil or butter you're cooking with. Follow the recipe and make sure the fat completely covers the bottom of the pot before the start of cooking. Number 4, don't use metal utensils when cooking. Again, I am a culprit here. I've definitely scraped the bottom of my Dutch oven with a serving spoon before and completely regretted it when I saw the scratch it left behind. Play it safe and use utensils that don't run any risk of scratching that precious enamel coating, like silicone, wood, or heat-resistant plastic. Follow this tip. Opt for using silicone, wooden, or heat-resistant plastic utensils with your Dutch oven. If you have to use a metal spoon or whisk, be careful not to scrape it on the enameled bottom or sides. And finally, 5, don't put it away while still wet. While Dutch ovens can technically go to the dishwasher, doing so can dull the enamel coating, so your best bet is to hand wash your pot. When you do so, make sure you dry it completely, as any excess moisture that lingers could cause rust to form. Follow this tip. Hand wash your Dutch oven and dry the base and the lid completely before putting it away.
Heloise's household hints. Dear Heloise, after making a batch of meatballs, my mother-in-law would place them on a cookie sheet so that they were not touching each other. She would freeze them still on the tray overnight. The next day, when the meatballs were frozen solid, she would place them in a plastic bag and return them to the freezer. When cooking dinner, she took out as many as she needed for that meal. I use the same method for things such as chicken, sausage, etc. Signed, Susan Dunson of Troy, New York. Dear Heloise, instead of putting brown sugar on my oatmeal, I stir 1/4 teaspoon of molasses into the pan during the final minutes of cooking. I get all the flavor I crave without the added sugar. Signed, Deborah S. of League City, Texas. And Heloise responds, Deborah, the good news is that molasses is low in saturated fat and sodium. It's also a good source of vitamin B6, potassium, magnesium, and manganese. The bad news is there's a large portion of molasses calories come from sugars. Calories in molasses are about the same as sugar, but molasses contains about half the sucrose as sugar. Paul?
Well, we're going to talk to the food doctor. After all these years of avoiding butter, now, thankfully, we've been told it's perfectly fine to eat. Why the change? Answer. Butter has long been an important and enjoyable part of the human diet. While some cultures adopted olive and other vegetable oils as sources of dietary fat, butter was the preferred choice for much of the Western world. The reasons were the same then as now. Butter is rich, creamy, and delicious on its own and makes other foods even better. Is there a more comforting food combination than fresh butter on warm bread? For much of human history, the popularity of butter and its strong demand made it very expensive. Until the early 1900s, butter cost more than meat, cheese, or sugar. Still, we love our butter, and at the turn of the 20th century, Americans were consuming nearly 20 pounds per person per year. Around the same time, high prices and limited access led some consumers to switch to margarines. Made from vegetable oils, these products had actually been around for several decades. By the 1920s, margarine consumption reached nearly a fourth that of butter. The drop in butter sales even led Wisconsin and other dairy states to enact anti-margarine laws. For example, they prohibited the addition of yellow coloring, leaving the margarine with a pale, unappealing appearance. When the Depression hit, butter became even more of a luxury. Readers of a certain age may remember that butter was so precious during World War II that it was rationed. By the 1950s, butter consumption was on the steep decline, and margarine had taken over. Then, in the 1980s, medical experts determined that saturated fats and dietary cholesterol were associated with high risk for heart disease. Soon, butter and other animal fats became public enemy number one. With low-fat and fat-free diets in high gear, butter became the poster child for what not to eat. These reports translated into policy and products. Public health agencies and medical groups began recommending less animal and total fat in our diet. School lunch programs followed suit, and the food industry did as well. By 1997, butter consumption was at an all-time low. In the past few years, nutritionists and medical groups have re-examined the data on dietary fat and heart disease. The long-standing recommendation for replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat still stands. Thus, olive, corn, canola, and other vegetable oils remain the best choices for heart health. However, the role of saturated fats, like those found in butter, is a bit more nuanced. If these fats were bad for heart health, then diets low in saturated fat should reduce the risk for heart disease. However, recent studies in prestigious medical journals reported that these diets had no effect on heart disease risk. It now appears that the real culprit was the so-called trans fats. These are produced when liquid vegetable oils are converted into solid vegetable fats via the process of hydrogenation. Hydrogenated fats are great for frying and cooking. That's why they have long been used in chips, fried foods, and baked pastries and snacks. The bad news is that trans fats not only raise LDL, aka bad cholesterol, they also lower HDL, or good cholesterol. In many countries, including the US, industrially produced trans fats are no longer considered safe for consumption. Thus, they are now being phased out of processed foods. Ironically, among the foods that contained high levels of trans fat were the very same margarines that displaced butter from our diets. It turns out the cure was worse than the disease. In the past few years, butter has rebounded with the more favorable nutritional reports. Consumption is up about 20%. That's good for news of the butter industry, but even better news for butter-loving consumers.
I like butter.
Yep.
You got anything else in living today?
Nope.
Because, well, let's go over to the business and markets. And this is the business briefs for today. From Detroit, automobile sales in the U.S. fell 2% in the first quarter. Another sign the nation's economy is starting to slow. Automakers sold just over 4 million vehicles from January through March, according to Ward's Automotive Intelligence, and industry analysts blame the decline on rising vehicle prices, competition from an abundant supply of late model used vehicles, and relatively high interest rates. Weak sales of cars, harsh winter weather, and the partial government shutdown also had an impact. Most analysts are predicting vehicle sales of around 16.9 million this year, still strong, but down from last year's 17.27 million. Sales peaked in 2016 at 17.55 million. Prices are a big factor. The National Automobile Dealers Association reported that the average new vehicle sales price was $36,410 in the end of the first quarter, up 3.3% from a year ago. Auto loan interest rates on average hit their highest point in a decade at 6.36%, up from 5.66% a year ago, according to Edmunds.com. The report of falling sales came a day after the Commerce Department reported that retail sales dropped 0.2% in February as consumers pulled back from spending on building materials, groceries, furniture, electronics, and clothing. And that leads right into this next one from Washington. Orders to U.S. factories for big-ticket manufactured goods fell 1.6% in February, the biggest drop in 4 months, reflecting a plunge in the volatile commercial aircraft category. The Commerce Department said Tuesday that the February decline came after a 0.1% rise in January and was the weakest showing since a 4.3% fall in October. Orders in a category that serves as a proxy for business investment plans edged down 0.1% in February after a 0.9% advance in January. Whole Foods Market says it will lower prices on hundreds of grocery items this week, the latest effort to reshape the grocer's pricey image. Amazon.com touted a round of price cuts immediately after buying Whole Foods in August 2017, and over the last year worked to roll out grocery delivery from store locations and introduce discounts for Amazon Prime members. Whole Foods, with fewer than 500 stores, said the latest price cuts average about 20%. Amazon acquired Whole Foods to catch Walmart, Kroger, and Costco wholesale in grocery sales. And finally, a day of listless trading on Wall Street ended with an uneven finish for stock indexes as the market lost some of its momentum after a 3-day winning streak. After a brief early slide, U.S. stocks mostly wavered between small gains and losses. Consumer products companies took some of the heaviest losses, led by drugstore chain operator Walgreens Boots Alliance, which plunged after it slashed its forecast following a weak quarter. Competitor CVS followed it lower. The S&P 500 ended essentially flat. Paul?
This article out of the state of Washington, the Air Force again refusing to accept Boeing KC-46 Pegasus tankers after the company failed to resolve issues with tools and parts erroneously left in the plane's compartments. Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson told lawmakers Tuesday. The tankers, based on a 767 commercial jet, are the latest problem for the domestic aerospace giant, which has been under intense scrutiny since the recent fatal crashes of two 737 MAX planes. We actually stopped again the acceptance of the KC-46 because of foreign object debris we found in some closed compartments, Wilson said during testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. Wilson said the Air Force has a corrective action in place, including ensuring the production line is being run the way it needs to be run. The KC-46 is built in Everett, Washington, while the 737 MAX planes are assembled 40 miles south in Renton, Washington. The problems with the tanker are unrelated to the 737 crisis, but nonetheless threaten to further undermine Boeing's reputation and its bottom line, even as one of its former executives, Patrick Shanahan, serves as acting defense secretary. Boeing has paid the government more than $3 billion for delays and cost overruns on the tanker program. Initially scheduled for 2017, the Air Force received its first KC-46 in January. In February, it stopped taking delivery of the KC-46, and the fleet was grounded after tools and other extraneous parts were found on the planes. The foreign object debris can pose a safety hazard and can also damage the planes. The Air Force resumed the deliveries of the tankers on March 11. We continue to work with Boeing to ensure that every aircraft delivered meets the highest quality and safety standards, the Air Force said in a statement. This week, our inspectors identified additional foreign object debris and areas where Boeing did not meet quality standards. Bob?
And now a word from our sponsor. WellCare of Nebraska is proud to bring you today's reading of the Omaha World Herald and Lincoln Journal Star. For more about WellCare, call today at 1-888-255-2605 or visit www.wellcare.com/Nebraska. And it's time now for sports. And of course, right now, all the sizzle going around is on Hoiberg becoming the new Nebraska head basketball coach. So this is an article from Chris Heddy, one of the Omaha World Herald reporters. With a recent tan from the Caribbean sun, a salt and pepper 5 o'clock shadow, and a gingham button-up shirt, the new face of the Nebraska basketball program emerged from the elevator doors at 3:02 p.m. Cheerleaders lined a path for him into the packed third floor of Memorial Stadium, where the light applause broke out as he smiled and waved. He hugged his parents in the front row. He nodded toward fans and administrators lining the balcony above, then took a seat next to athletic director Bill Moose. And that's when Fred Hoiberg laid out his vision for a new Nebraska basketball. He coasted through the afternoon with a sincere and urgent message that Nebraska, despite its history, is not a broken program that cannot be fixed. I see real potential to have long-term success, Hoiberg said. I wouldn't take this job if I didn't fully expect to turn it around and win consistently. Hoiberg was introduced as the program's 28th coach to a throng of media and 2 rows of family. He began his press conference with an 8-minute monologue about his many connections to Lincoln, including his grandfather, Jerry Bush, Nebraska's 21st coach in the 1950s and 60s. His mother and father are both UNO grads. His grandfather taught on campus. His niece Emma is a student manager in basketball. I can't stop smiling, Karen Hoiberg, Fred's mom and Bush's daughter, said before the press conference. Such a fun day. The coach, who was fired in December by the Chicago Bulls, said he thought of taking this year off or looking into NBA jobs. He talked with other schools. He weighed his options. Contrary to rumors, he said, this wasn't a done deal until about 4 days before the press conference. He signed his contract Saturday. Moose Vision, Nebraska's facilities, and the family connections sealed the deal. Hoiberg becomes the 3rd highest paid coach in the Big Ten, making more than all but 10 coaches made this season, and his work to make Nebraska into a basketball contender begins now. He's already met with the team. He spent the past 72 hours calling Husker commits and potential recruits. He'll hit the road the next 2 days to meet the recruits face-to-face. There's a lot of work to do, Hoiberg said. Our players understand that, and we know we have to do everything possible to put ourselves into a position where we're going to be successful. But Tuesday was not about broken down basketball programs. It was history. In many ways, Wednesday diverged from the history of Husker hoops. Hoiberg's press conference was on the 3rd floor of Memorial Stadium, not in the lobby of the Hendricks Training Complex like the 2012 conference for Tim Miles. Hoiberg promised an exciting, fun, fast-paced offense counter to Miles' defensive-oriented program. The new coach spoke in paragraphs and showed off his basketball nerdiness, dropping play calls and details of 3-point plays he likes to run. He even tweeted for the first time in 3 years, moments after entering the facility for the first time as coach. Hoiberg has been where Nebraska has never been. He has done what Nebraska has never done. And Tuesday, he cut through the chaos and excitement of his arrival to Lincoln with a professional and steady confidence. I was fortunate enough to play 10 years in the NBA, and I didn't play because I was the most athletic, he said. I didn't play because I was the most gifted. The reason I played was because I was the hardest worker. Nobody was going to outwork me. That's how I got to that level, and that's what I'm going to demand and expect out of our players. After his press conference, he was swarmed by cameras and family. The former Iowa State standout and coach didn't play to the dozens of cameras. He talked to his mother and father as if they were in his kitchen on a Sunday, not surrounded by hundreds of people staring at him. Hoiberg was ushered all around the room, stopped often for a hug or a handshake. The student section group, the Iron Inn, unloaded a stack of new T-shirts for him. This is great, thank you, he said. I hear you guys are the best. Media waited for the new coach near the elevators. Hoiberg squeezed his way into the middle, and cameras and phones near his face lurched forward. Hoiberg didn't flinch. He's been here before. When it was all over, he calmly walked onto the packed elevator, joined his wife for more interviews. There was no pomp. There was no final celebratory cheer. There was no question as the elevator doors closed, Nebraska was headed toward something different. Paul?
Well, continuing that vein, Isaiah Roby stood out at Coach Fred Hoiberg's introductory news conference for a couple of reasons. One, because he was the only 6'8", 230-pound power forward with 3-point range on the 3rd floor of Memorial Stadium. That would definitely stand him out there. Two, because the decision he settles on sometimes in the next 2 months will likely end up being one of the biggest pieces of Nebraska's 2019-20 season on the court. I think that if I get out in front of these NBA teams and perform the way I know I can, I think I can get drafted this year, Roby said Tuesday. If I know I'm going to get drafted, that's something. Hoiberg even encouraged me. We talked on the phone, and he said, if you get the opportunity, I'm not going to hold you back. I want what's best for you. That would definitely make it hard to return to Nebraska. But that's not to say there's no chance of Roby coming back for his senior season. Far from it. Roby said he and Hoiberg have talked about what his role would be with the Huskers should he return, and he's been encouraged by those discussions. That's something that he talked to me about. With the way they play, fast-paced, he said he likes to put the ball in his four-man's hands a lot, Roby said. We didn't go into that in-depth of talks about it, but obviously I'm somebody that can thrive in his system. Many have compared what Roby could potentially be in Hoiberg's system to what George Niang turned into for Iowa State while playing under Hoiberg for 3 seasons. Niang, now with the Utah Jazz, left Iowa State as the program's second all-time leading scorer and parlayed his success into a second-round draft spot. Roby has watched plenty of Niang's films, he said, and tried to take pieces of his game to add to his own. That evolution would seem primed to take the next step should he return. It is a pro both ways, going or staying. Obviously, coming back to the team, there's a lot of stuff up in the air on who's going to be on the team. And that's a problem every offseason for every team because so many people transfer nowadays, Roby said. But yeah, I think having a coach like Coach Hoiberg to come back to would definitely be a pro. Roby and Johnny Trueblood were the only 2 players from the current roster to attend the news conference. Hoiberg said he met with the team just before coming over to Memorial Stadium. When you have the experience he has from so many different angles, he handles those things great. New Nebraska assistant Matt Abdel-Maisa said Hoiberg's first interaction with the current Huskers. I think he commands a lot of respect right when he walks into the room. That seems to be the case Tuesday in a short get-together. Hoiberg said he plans to meet with each player individually Friday to go over expectations and lay out a schedule for the spring. And the team will get down to business after the Final Four. I love the meeting today. You looked up and everybody had eye contact with me, Hoiberg said. So now, as Nebraska basketball begins to move forward and NU players watch the Final Four this weekend, perhaps what Hoiberg told them in that short meeting will start to take hold. I talked to them about the opportunity we have moving forward. And this is such a special time of year. The greatest sporting event in the world is going on right now with the NCAA tournament, Hoiberg said. And I challenged them the amount of work it takes. That's what I'm going to demand and expect out of our players is to go out every day and give everything we can and put on exciting product on the floor. That will make our fans proud.
In Nebraska football news, Katerian Legrone was one of those big, fast athletes in high school who played just about everywhere and dared the opponent to stop him. At 6'3", 235 pounds, Legrone could out-muscle cornerbacks, run past linebackers, and earn scholarship offers from colleges all over the country, including Nebraska, where Legrone promptly had to learn how to get into a three-point stance as an inline tight end. Welcome to college. Legrone was fine lining up on the right side of the offensive line. On the left, where he had to put his left hand on the turf, he was uncomfortable. It made me move a little bit slow, he said. So, like many freshmen, Legrone took his lumps and learned he had one catch and learned He had one catch while preserving his redshirt season, built his body, and tried to learn and use offense. I feel like when I got there, I was a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, Legrone said. Now I'm a good 8. I'm just trying to keep playing fast, physical. The more he does, tight ends coach Sean Beckton suggests, the more Legrone will play. The Atlanta native differs from the 3 tight ends in front of him. Jack Stoll, 6'4", 260 pounds. Austin Allen, 6'8", 245. And Kurt Rofdahl, 6'7", 250. In his route running talent and athletic ability. Legrone is able to line up away from the offensive lineman and work as a slot receiver, where he's still fast enough to stretch the field, but his size gives him mismatch advantages. But Nebraska likes its tight ends to have the versatility to fill multiple roles in a fast-paced, no-huddle offense. One play, Legrone might be that slot guy. The next play, he might be lined up just behind the lineman for a wham cross block against the defensive end. After that, he could be an inline tight end blocking an outside linebacker. It's not enough to do one of the 3 roles. In huddle-up offenses, which change personnel after each play, it might. But Nebraska's offense moves so fast, it needs tight ends who are jacks of all trades. A single substitution on offense can break the spell of fatigue on a defense, which can match that substitution with its own while an official stands over the ball. Legrone has grown since last fall, Beckton said. He can show Legrone film of last season and spring practice, Legrone's first, and chart the growth. Legrone calls Beckton a father figure and the key reason he switched his commitment from Central Florida to Nebraska. He's a big factor in my life outside of football, Legrone said. Beckton is calm but frank with his assessment of the tight ends. Stoll has long been the number 1 guy, the vocal leader, while Allen has moved ahead of Rofdahl for number 2. Legrone's model of tight end, quicker, faster, is Nebraska of the future, as is the Omaha Burke graduate who walks by without pads. Beckton is ultra excited to give reps to Chris Hickman, 6'6", 210 pounds, another elite high school athlete who played all over the field, including tight end. For now, Hickman, an early enrollee, isn't healthy enough for practice, so he's learning the offense. His best football is ahead of him, Beckton said. I can kind of groom him into what I want him to be. Start from ground level. He's done a really good job of grasping the offense. When he's able to get his body ready to roll, we'll get him going. But he has the speed and the size to make plays down the field, just like Legrone. Paul?
Justin Edwards calls it being patiently aggressive. Those 2 words don't always fit together in a non-softball world of things, but for Nebraska's best hitter, they've become a productive combination. Edwards blasted 2 home runs Tuesday evening, including a first pitch shot to dead center that set the tone in the Husker softball team's 14-3 5-inning win over South Dakota State at Bowline Stadium. Alvius Simmons also homered, and Nebraska cranked out 13 hits in reaching its 3rd win in 4 games. Well, it's 11:59. It's time for us to move on. So this has been Paul Murphy reading articles from the Lincoln Journal-Star, wishing you a great and blessed day.
So this is Bob Gotting. It has been a pleasure reading for you today. It sounds like it might get a little wet out there, so try to stay dry and have a great one.
Though I like the temperatures.
Yeah.
Supposed to be happen.
When all your worldly travels, you ever been to Southeast Asia?
I was in Vietnam and in Thailand.
This is the Radio Talk Network in Omaha,
You ever
Nebraska.
go to Cambodia or Laos?
Serving our blind and visually impaired listeners.
No, I had a roommate that was in Laos.
Brought to you with the cooperation of KIOS FM in Omaha and statewide through the
My wife retired in December, and we're looking for a trip to take, and this one kind of popped up on our radar. And so it's a kind of what they call a small group tour, so it's like 22 people max that goes to Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. That you think that was, you were there when the war was going on, right? So that wasn't
Thailand was very impressive.